everyone, welcome back to Where Do They Get Those Wonderful Commentaries? I am Captain Logan.
And I am Danny Nixon.
Welcome to day 4. Today, Danny and I are not gonna make any crazy voices, or not a lot, anyway. And we're not gonna talk about just one character. Today, Danny and I are gonna talk about the legacy of Batman in 1989, and that's majoritively gonna be the subject for today. I'm sure some other things about the movie will come up as we're watching it again. That's bound to happen. But this was Danny's idea, and I liked it a lot. The notion today is, how did '89 affect film in general and Batman specifically? We're going to talk about that primarily for the next 2 hours while we're watching the movie again.
Yeah, this is one I'm really excited to talk about because I think there's a lot of stuff that is important to this movie that doesn't necessarily get covered when you're talking about what's actually going on in the movie itself. Because there's a lot of stuff that, just from being one of the first really successful superhero movies, that influences cinema, especially superhero cinema in general. After it kind of affects your perceptions of what this movie is, just based on what you have experienced after it. Or if you're like me and are younger than this film, you experienced all these other things that are influenced by this, and then you don't necessarily realize it until you're old enough to go back and explore this film with that context in mind.
Well, I say all the time that despite all the issues this film has story-wise, and the ways in which people don't feel like it holds up as well, or they come to it, as younger viewers after seeing a lot of Batman, and it's not their Batman, it's not what they want from Batman. I'm always talking about how you wouldn't get a lot of the stuff you love without this movie, and it'll be nice to really dive into that idea and sink our teeth into it.
Yeah, there's a lot of specific things that I think are directly influenced by this that I cannot wait to talk about. There's some obvious ones that people can think of. But
yeah, of course. Well, and obviously, superhero cinema for the next 10 years is just trying to recreate the magic of this movie for the most part.
Oh, absolutely. I'd say up until maybe 2005, maybe 2008, if you're depending on what you want to see as the first of the influential films of the newer age. This is the film that you could kind of trace anything from like 1990 to maybe 2005, depending on where you draw that line, and say, yeah, this got this from this got this from Batman '89. And it's not really until we get, ironically enough, a new reboot of Batman that we start to see a different take on what superhero films can be, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that there's a difference between a good or a great film and an important movie, and so it might sound like we're heaping a lot of praise on this film in saying, like, these are the reasons it's great, because look how important it is. That's not what we'll be doing. Just so that you understand where we're coming from with this. Obviously, I love this movie. I think at this point, Danny kind of also loves this movie.
I'm fascinated with it. I don't know if I can say I love it, but I'm close to saying I love it. I'm gonna say on the record right now, I love this movie.
But the point of this commentary, again, is to talk about the legacy and the influence, and why it continues to matter. And that's not us saying that's why it's wonderful. That's why you should like it.
No, absolutely not. There's plenty of films that are like big, important, and you need it for anything else that's come after it, like a Citizen Kane or something. That, I haven't seen Citizen Kane, but there are other films like a Citizen Kane, maybe not exactly like a Citizen Kane, that I've seen. I'm like, yeah, I don't really love it all that much, but I get why it's important. And I think this is...
Roger Ebert gave this movie 2 stars when it came out. That's probably fair. Especially story-wise. Obviously, I would give it at least half a star or more than that. But I'm just saying that, like, even then there were some critics that had enough perspective to realize that this was a watered down version of a better movie.
Yeah, which is really interesting to think about after having read, having read the
exactly
rough draft script and me listening to that video and looking at it a little bit.
But I just want to have that perspective as we're talking about this. So anyway, another Batman 89 commentary. We are going to be more than halfway there when we get finished with this one. So everybody rig up your DVD player, your Blu-ray player, or however you want to watch it. I guess your Blu-ray player would also play the DVD. But anyway, get your Blu-ray, your DVD, however you want to watch it. Get it to timestamp 0 and get ready to press play when I say now. We're going to watch Batman 89 again, and we're going to talk about the legacy and influence of the film. Here we go. Everybody, please press play. Danny, you ready?
I am ready.
Everybody, please press play right now.
Okay, so I think... Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can go ahead.
We've talked a little bit about this opening and whether... And you suggested that it would be cool to see more movies do what this does with like a big reveal at the end. There have been a couple, 3 things here and there. Nothing's jumping to mind, but like I don't see this constantly.
No, I think one of the later examples I can think of, you're talking about how it reveals the logo at the end, correct?
Right, how it reveals the logo, yeah.
Punisher 2004.
You're flying through, and you don't know exactly what it is you're looking at, and I think most of us would have assumed Batcave.
Yeah, when you look at this, it looks like what you would expect a Batcave to look at. Like, obviously, it's supposed to be stone. It's definitely... I think they went into it consciously thinking, we're going to make people think we're in the Batcave because of what they're using for the construction of this logo. But I really do like the kind of like the twist of it not being an actual location, more just being we're kind of exploring the logo. And if I want,
and it's also smart because that's what the advertising did. It was just this logo.
Yeah, and we've talked about how they use different Bat logos for different things, like the Batmobile, the suit, and obviously the marketing. It's obviously very smart to use the marketing logo for this intro and not use any other version of the logo that we see, like the Bat signal or the one that's on the suit.
That's a good point too. Yeah, but it doesn't have any color to it because it's the stone thing.
Which I think is a really cool look. I've never really, outside of this, I've never really seen a whole lot of stuff do the classic like yellow oval logo without doing the yellow for the color contrast. I think it looks really good here.
But yeah, besides
see it on a suit,
like
but it
parody
really
things to this movie, can you think of another movie after this that kind of does this?
The Punisher 2004 logo, or not logo, the opening for that.
It does it.
Yeah. What does Warzone do? I think they do something with their intro, but I can't remember which one it is.
I don't remember Warzone's intro, but I put the Punishers in my top 10 intros.
Yeah, and of course there's the Spider-Man intro, which kind of does this with the webbing, not so much the logo.
It's not a reveal, but it's an abstract image that you associate with the character. Yeah,
that and the swipe when he's doing the montage of drawing up all of his suits, and we pull in through that logo for one of the swipes.
Now I want to be careful not to, just because this is the movie we're focused on, act like there are things that this did first that other things actually did first, or that it was more influential than it was, of course. But prior to this, I'm sure you did have some movies that would, and like that was a miniature as opposed to like a CG effect or something, obviously. But I don't even know if I'm saying that this was necessarily really influential on this. But I just want to make the point that most of the things I can think of that went to like a physical object that it was really close up on and put credits over. Like we do, sort of like the Hulk opening, right? Like we do that a lot with science-y type movies. A lot of that's later on. Like I guess, I don't know, Willy Wonka kind of does it.
Yeah.
With candy, but there's not a ton of it.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's more of a thing that this film could be credited as the influence of why everything does this, or if it's just more of those kind of like it's in the water or it's in the air of that time of.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, I don't want to necessarily give this movie credit for that, but because very often it was, more like the Superman thing where you've got just credits on the screen, and like you might have something going on in the background.
Right, you do some kind of effect with the text, but you're not putting the text over what the main focus is supposed to be of the opening's intro. So, before talking
but
about...
I guess those are somewhat similar, even in that it's a little bit abstract. Like, it's space.
Right.
You know, it's sort of like, with Superman, it's sort of like, I guess we're kind of traveling from Krypton to Earth.
That's what I always interpreted it as. Like,
Yeah.
we're either following the spaceship or we are the spaceship, and everything is zooming past like stars or solar systems would be for that one.
Okay, so that's less abstract because it's actually in the world. Like, that symbol is nowhere in this world. That's just anyway.
Yeah. But one point I wanted to make before going into the influence this film had on future cinema, I think it's really interesting that at the time the script for this is being written, and at the time all the development for this is going on, the thing they're looking at is Frank Miller, who, when the first rough draft for this movie was written, year one didn't exist. That's 86,
That's a really good point.
Year one starts at 87. It's really interesting to think that this film is influenced by something that's only a few months, a few years old at the time. In the comics, that would be like nowadays doing something based on Tom King's work. And it's really interesting looking at it from today's perspective of, we usually go back 10, 20 years. At the time this is being made, you'd probably go back to like a Dennis O'Neil thing at the earliest, as far as an example of good, grounded Batman to influence what you're doing on screen. And I think it's really interesting how the influences they were pulling from were so of the time when this is being made, and so kind of on the nose of what current Batman readers are looking at and kind of expecting or hoping that they could get out of a new Batman reboot.
Now, that's true, and obviously this movie doesn't happen without Dark Knight Returns.
No, absolutely not.
But it's interesting that we didn't just flat out make that movie, and that sounds like a commercial decision. Like, that's probably not going to sell real well to the general public, where you have an older Batman that's been out for a long time, and like, that's probably not going to work. So it's influenced by Miller, but it also happens because Dark Batman was suddenly in the public consciousness again.
Right, yeah.
So that's almost more important than the actual story influences or visual influences that make it into the movie, because dialogue-wise and even story-wise, it reads a lot more like other guys that were writing around that period than Frank Miller to me.
Oh, absolutely. It was just something I found really interesting when I was kind of thinking about this movie and what was of the time. I was like, wait, because of my age, I always think of Frank Miller's Batman as classic Batman, as far as it's the older Batman. So I've always looked at this as being influenced by that as, oh yeah, of course you're influenced by Frank Miller. But at the time of this, that wouldn't be the go-to of, yeah, of course you're going to make a Batman movie and look at Frank Miller's work on Batman. So I thought that was a really interesting, that just how on the nose some of the influence, not on the nose, of the time, some of the influences they're looking at are...
And I would argue that some things in comics that that feel really accessible to comic readers wouldn't feel as accessible to general audiences.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that this is going as much to like Neil Adams and Englehart and stuff.
Absolutely. You wouldn't do more of at this time. I don't think you would do more of the kind of Silver Age, kind of Batman 66 type of stuff, where you're going not necessarily more cosmic, but more out there and kind of less realistic.
Well, and also importantly, yeah, like I'm fixated on this because you've stumbled on something that I can't stop thinking about, which is the difference between what influences the story and what makes the movie happen. And like this isn't it's influenced by 66 in certain ways because it can't help but be, but like we're trying to get away from that as much as humanly possible. But if you had but I mean, like, if you compare it to, if you're a younger viewer and you didn't grow up with this, and you compare it to, like, Nolan's Batman, it probably feels a little bit more like a more heightened out there 60s type Batman, even though it wants to be more serious than that. But the more 60s influences wouldn't have been at play as much because the movie doesn't happen if you do that. I mean, like, that's the whole point of it, was let's get away from that.
Oh, absolutely. And it's very interesting, the things from 66 that stick around in this that I don't think are consciously done as influences from that movie, but more of just that TV show, but more influences that TV show just had on Batman in general, and our perception of who that character is, and who.
Although I know at one time there had been talk about a comedy.
Yeah, with Eddie
Murphy and stuff. Yeah,
Bill Murray. Yeah.
So, like, I say this movie doesn't happen if we look at those influences. I mean, this movie doesn't get made.
No, certainly not.
Obviously, that goes without saying. But, like, I guess, if the comedic thing had happened, I guess we would be saying, the 60s is what people know, so let's just do a comedy. But I don't know if they had tried to go in that direction, if the movie would ever have actually gotten made. I've always wondered about that.
If it got made, it would be more of a cult classic at this point, I think, instead of something that was so hugely influential and such a big media thing at the time. It would if it got made as a comedy, it certainly wouldn't have the lasting impact and legacy that this film ultimately ends up having.
People are so used to Dark Batman now that if you didn't grow up with this and you're not young enough or you're not old enough to remember when it came out, I think it's probably kind of difficult to imagine just how huge this was and how big of a deal it was that we were trying to bring this back to its pulp roots and take it more seriously. And that's why people at the time didn't look at this as being as like hokey in the ways it is hokey as it is, because everything's relative. It's all about perception. And at the time, this is more serious than you ever thought you would see Batman go, and much darker than you thought you'd see Batman go.
Exactly. As someone who grew up watching Batman the Animated Series, which we'll absolutely have to talk about when we talk about the influence of this show, but I kind of took for granted how dark this movie is of the time, and compared to what most people probably looked at Batman as. So seeing a show that was influenced by this movie, excuse me, I'm going to mix those two up a lot, I can tell. Seeing something that was taking that darkness and that aesthetic darkness and fitting it into a kid-friendly kind of alternative to this movie, and perhaps more of a kid-friendly alternative to Returns, which ultimately goes a little bit darker in some ways. It took me a while to really fully appreciate, this is dark for a Batman thing from this time without having a whole lot of dark Batman influences in popular culture. So this is something that I think it's really interesting that we look at this one as, at the time, we look at this one as super dark and super grounded. Then we go to 2005 and look at Batman Begins as super dark and super grounded compared to this. And then just 3 years later, we look at Dark Knight as super grounded and super realistic compared to Batman Begins, and how we just continuously keep making the character darker and darker, even all the way up to Batman versus Superman. We just have this constant progression of the character is getting darker or more serious or more mature. And
however you want to say it.
Yeah, however you interpret those different versions of Batman, even though two of those are the same version. But it's just interesting that this is a character that we keep trying to go darker with. And I think, personally, somewhere between this film and Batman Begins is like my perfect level of dark. He doesn't have to be super brooding all the time for me to enjoy the character. There's obviously a level of brooding that you have to be true to the comics. But I think reeling in some of that darkness or some of that maturity would kind of freshen up the character more on the big screen, I think, personally. And I'd like to see more of that influence from this movie come back.
Like, you say you want something in between. I feel like Begins nailed it. I think, because Bruce Wayne's got a sense of humor in that is the sweet spot for me. Like, Begins has a lot of, like, just straight up amusing banter between, especially obviously between Bruce and Alfred. Like, I think they actually managed that.
Yeah, it would. If there's any Batman movie I could point to and say that's my level of darkness or brooding for Batman, it's definitely Begins. I think there's some stuff aesthetically that I'd like to see pulled more from this.
No, of course.
To compare with that.
Sure. But I just mean character-wise.
Oh, absolutely. But I think part of what influences the character is how stylized or how dark the world around them is.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Because I think...
But you can have almost that exact characterization and put them in a more stylized world.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it kind of would enhance some of that characteristic. Some of that banter might come off a little different in the context of this world than it does in the world of Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah. So, a lot of people who love a more serious, darker Batman, and of course I think that there are, as I've said before, 100 different ways, 89 different ways to do this character. And like you say, we keep making him darker on the big screen. That is absolutely true. But in between those things, in other media, in between the raindrops of the movies, we've got so many different takes on this character that it runs the gamut, and he's been super silly again, and he's been even scarier and darker, and even sometimes like really psychologically screwed up. And you got the GD Batman, and just every different permeation of this character. Like, what I've learned from decades of Batman being as popular as he got with this movie, and even more so with the Nolan movies, is that again there are so many different ways you can do this character that most of them seem to be valid to me.
Oh, absolutely. I am a big fan of the more campy Batman, the 66, the Brave and the Bold type of Batman. Just almost to the exact same extent I am this kind of Batman.
See, so am I. I didn't know that about you. Yeah,
I love it. I pre-ordered the 66 Blu-ray box set when that came out.
You can't have one without the other.
No,
is
absolutely
kind of
not.
The point I'm trying to make. I think, if I may, I think 66 and 89 are Batman and the Joker.
I agree. I think the 66 interpretation of Batman, even though it's far more campy compared to what we're traditionally exposed to with Batman, is just as valid of a Batman as any other live-action adaptation, any other animated adaptation, any other in-comic adaptation. And I think something from that gets overlooked, in the context of 66, that's probably the most detective Batman we've gotten in live action.
I know, isn't that hilarious? But it's not just that it's valid, it's that you don't get this without it.
No, certainly not. This
in exactly the same way you don't get Begins without this movie. Like, yes, there's a progression, but even beyond the progression, there's a yin and a yang.
Absolutely. There's definitely a
that sounds like
resistance.
One must be negative and one must be positive. For some people, that is the case. But I guess the point I'm getting at is you've got a lot of people that hate the 60s Batman because it set us back for decades not getting a serious Batman. This character, I submit, would never be at the popularity he is without those 30 years we had to wait for it.
No, I agree.
Or 25 years we had to wait for it. I think that had to happen.
Yeah, there's a definite distance makes the heart grow fonder thing with that. And the fact that this is made in such a resistance to that previous
but also because 66 made it that popular in the first place. I mean, in the comics, like, people liked Batman. The black and white serials were well liked. It was never Fleischer, though. It was never Superman level. He wasn't the same kind of cultural icon, right? And
absolutely not.
We talk about the Batmania you had with 89, with all the merchandising and how huge that was and stuff, but 60s was as big or bigger than that. And so he had to get that popular, I guess, in that campy way, just because it was that sweet spot when that came out. It was what the culture wanted and needed right then, before the serious Batman could ever be as popular as he is now.
Oh, absolutely. The interpretation of Batman really depends on what the culture is looking for at that time. And because it's such a versatile character that you can take to the extreme lights and campiness of 66, or the extreme darks of Frank Miller-esque Batman, whatever the popular culture at the time, whatever direction that's leaning, Batman can fit into that if you have someone who's got their finger on the pulse of what society is going towards and really trying to hone in on that. And you see it with Begins, 89, 66. When it taps into that at the right time, it kind of explodes and becomes very, very culturally significant, because Batman, I think, is just a cool character in general, but when you're able to make it connect to what mainstream culture wants at that time, you can make it grow exponentially into something that is just all encapsulating.
Yeah, Batman might have gotten popular without the 60s show, but I don't know if it would have ever blown up the way it's blown up. I guess it's hard to know, but again, when people complain but it took us so long to finally get serious Batman, without that show, I don't think you ever would have had it. And what's weird and interesting about Batman 66 is, and I'll try not to talk about that too much while we're watching this movie, but obviously that was the huge thing before this, and it's a thing I know a lot about. That show works as a parody of Batman, and people didn't know Batman, so that became the version people knew, and it's. Once you really know what Batman's about, it's even funnier, and there's another layer, and I always talk about the layers with 60s Batman, then you get this, and you have this to compare it to. And so if you never read a comic book, and you watched this, and you went back and you look at 60s Batman, you're like, okay, I see what they're doing.
Right, you could almost look at the evolution of Batman and then the perception of Batman the same way we look at classic characters like Frankenstein and Dracula, where a lot of people may only know them through the campy, like, kids movie like Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein, where it's very kind of kid-friendly, very campy, not all that scary. And you realize that it's kind of a parody of the Universal horror. And then we see a growth from that kind of campiness to people wanting to do a more serious thing, switching from Frankenstein to, like, Dracula or vampires, going to the, like, Interview with the Vampire place, where it started off in a darker place. The big thing that made it blow up was a pop culture kind of campiness to it. We bring it back to a darker place when we do something new with it, and that kind of influence travels and evolves.
No, that's an excellent point. Wants. Yeah, it's like a pendulum swing, and we just keep going to, like, the other side of a thing to try to rope in people that aren't already into it, and then those people like it, and then we bring it back to something closer to what it was before. I'd like to think that could happen with Star Trek.
I would hope so.
I'd like to think that's exactly what's going on with Star Trek right now. Potentially.
I think where the culture... I'm not a mind reader, or future teller. I think where the culture is going right now, at least from what I see in my generation, we are all looking for something a little bit more optimistic. We all kind of... We're a meme culture. We all like stuff that's super ironic, super cynical. But I think at the heart of all of our wants is something more optimistic, more hopeful for what the future could bring.
And just variety, right? Like, when so much stuff is cynical and so much is post-apocalyptic, you start to... I mean, like counterculture is always obviously going to be the opposite of whatever is big and in right now.
Exactly. You have the kids...
That's what that means.
Yeah. You have the kids of the hippies who grew up to be yuppies. You have the kids of the yuppies who grew up to be, I guess, millennials, whatever label you want to stick on each generation. But I think we're seeing some of that same stuff with Batman, where there are now kids who are growing up whose parents were directly influenced by this movie and by Batman the Animated Series, who may have grown up with... Who may be growing up right now with parents who are exposing them to this kind of a Batman, while they're also seeing stuff like Brave and the Bold, which was on not too long ago, that maybe those kids at that age might have been seeing.
Teen Titans Go and stuff like that, yeah. And so, and it's really easy to jump the gun and go, oh, well, like, that's horribly detrimental, because then they're just going to give us, like, 20, 30 years of, silly Batman again. We're just gonna swing the pendulum. But I think the difference is we've had so much different Batman now that I want to think, and also that the way technology is now, everything's gettable, and people tend to, when they really get into a property, go back and look at other things, no matter how old they are. I think a lot of people are doing this with stuff, and so maybe it won't have to just keep swinging like that. Maybe it will be okay to have a serious Batman and a silly Batman at the same time.
No, absolutely. With a age group now that's growing up, having only been exposed to being able to stream stuff, growing up with cord cutter parents who are just used to, I can see anything at any time. The context of when it was made isn't necessarily in the back of their mind of, oh, this is something my parents showed me and it was old from their time. It was, I experienced this through Netflix or through Hulu, and not necessarily realizing it's as old as my parents, or as, stuff like that. That changes the perception of, this isn't old Batman. This is that other Batman that I was watching at the same time as I was watching this Batman.
I think a lot of the reason that we continue to call back to this movie, besides the fact that it was just so hugely popular when it came out, is because of memorable one-liners and stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
It's really quotable. It's so easy to go back to this stuff. It's the same thing as Some Days You Can't Get Rid of a Bomb. Like, there are 3 or 4 lines from this movie, like Where Does He Get Those Wonderful Toys, that we just cannot stop going back to.
No, certainly. I think the ability to kind of meme something, and I know I've used that term earlier, but that's something that doesn't just exist in an internet era. There's things that people always catch on to. There's always little inside jokes or references to something. And I think that a movie that's able to, I think, be genuinely good, I think this movie is genuinely good, but also has stuff that you can pull and say, Where does he get those wonderful toys? or any other big quotable line, you know, an I'm Batman type of thing, where people can hear that and go, oh yeah, that's that Batman, really helps solidify its influence and solidify how it sticks around in the conscious, even when subsequent sequels may be going away from what this originally was intended to be, or originally envisioned as being.
Yeah, as much as I love this movie, I think where I'm at right now with it, the more we're looking at it, the more I, for whatever reason, cannot stop talking about it. I'm going to say it's like genuinely special and unique before I'll call it genuinely good, at least on a story level.
Oh, probably not.
Like as an artistic piece, you know,
yeah.
like
it's certainly not an Oscar winner. I think when I say genuinely good, I look at this as like the whole picture, everything about it. I think for me personally, it hits that perfect balance of style over substance. Like, you can have something that's too stylized with no substance, or you can have something that's more about the style, less about the substance, but the substance that's there is good and you can latch onto it and enjoy it just as much as you can enjoy the style of it. And there's some story problems with this, but I think at the end of the day, none of those really affect how I look at this movie. Granted, I haven't seen it 89 times.
It does me to some degree now, because I'm not... And again, part of it is because I saw what it wanted to be in the first place and what it ended up turning into, where it's not as much about telling a story as it is about like creating an atmosphere, making you feel a certain way, but I don't know how well it's actually communicating that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure if I went and actually read the first draft script, I would see things in this that I'm like, oh, they were trying to do this, or oh, this was the original intention.
It's just there are places where it feels like it wants to be about something.
Right, like the 80s materialism.
Especially that, yeah. And then, and just missed opportunities with Batman psychology and stuff, where Burton does a somewhat decent job of trying to get away from that and making it not about that, but enough of what Ham did with it is still in there where I'm like, I don't know that you're communicating that well enough. And so, and the reason I bring that up, not just to review this movie again, is to say that, and again, as I always say, there's a big difference between liking or loving something and thinking that it's critically, effective at whatever it's trying to do. I will never lose my love and nostalgia for this movie. It's not like I'm going to be done with this commentary series and I'm never watching this again. It's just that I've gotten more critical of it, and I can put one brain aside and use whichever brain I need to use in the moment with whatever we're talking about. But the reason I mention that is to say that I think it's probably indisputable that moving forward from this, we've got 3 more movies that aren't as story-driven as they could be, because this one wasn't.
No, absolutely. I think if this had been a movie that was more about the substance and less the style, you know, something that took the Batman Begins approach where it's about telling the story and not so much about we're building these really cool fancy set pieces and really making Gotham look gothic, we wouldn't have had a Returns which went more in that stylized way. We wouldn't have eventually evolved it into 2 toy commercials to sell very toyetic Batman figures. And
and this is why I say Batman Forever is technically the best story, because it's actually about Batman.
Yeah, of this series, it's certainly hard to
of this series. Yeah. I also still have a difficult time seeing Forever and Batman and Robin as actually really a part of the same world. It really feels like we jumped like a dimension over.
Yeah. I even have a hard time looking at Forever and Batman and Robin as the same, mainly because you don't have the same actor as Batman, even though everything else is pretty much the same.
Interesting. No, that's fair.
They certainly
that's
feel
totally fair.
And look.
It's just that
close.
the feels are right, of course, because you got the same director and it's the same composer and all that. I mean, just changing from Elfman to the other guy whose name's not coming to me right away, that immediately gives you a completely different feel.
Oh, certainly. Speaking of the score and everything, I think that's probably the easiest way to segue into Batman the animated series, since so much of that was directly influenced by Returns, and so much of that was from the look, from the score, to just what led to that show ultimately getting greenlit, is directly from Tim Burton's Batman, and is directly from what the studio wanted to see more of. You know, you can't put out a new Batman movie every week, but you can do a cartoon set in that kind of look and kind of that style and kind of that interpretation of Batman every week.
Well, again, I've had people tell me, like, I hate this movie because it's not my Batman and Batman is the animated series, and I'm like, okay, that's totally fair, and I'm not telling you to like something you don't like, but just understand you would not have that if it weren't for this.
No,
that version would not exist.
And when I was
it is ultimately a stepping stone. It was an accidental stepping stone. They had no idea that was ever going to happen, and famously, Bruce Timm and his crew had never made a show like that.
No, certainly not. And it's funny you bring that up, because when I was younger, or a younger teenager, I kind of had that same resistance to this movie that I had, that same resistance you were talking about, where like, well, yeah, Batman the Animated Series is my Batman. And it wasn't until I was able to learn the context of, no, this Batman is why we have the Batman I ultimately love, that I kind of feel more nostalgic to this than I probably should for my age. Where I look at this like...
Interesting. Because we built on it, and you can see that connective tissue.
Right, and I can see that without... I look at like when I close my eyes and think of Gotham, so much of what I think of Gotham is directly because of what we got on screen with this, and what that led to influencing other on-screen adaptations of Batman, or other, comics well after that look at this with the same fondness that someone who grew up on it like you would look at it.
And of course, I saw this before animated series, and I saw that as an extension of this movie when it was first on. I was 7 or 8. I mean, for me, animated series was a movie cartoon show. Just like The Mask, just like later on Men in Black would be. And it may be I guess it's safe to say, it's the most successful of those. Because it technically is that. It technically does count as a movie cartoon, even though it moves far away from that very quickly. Like after a while, besides the theme song, nobody's really thinking about 89 anymore. But when that show first starts, at least Warner Brothers is thinking of it as a thing we greenlit because of these movies, and I would argue they probably were thinking of that as a thing based on these. It's not technically, but I think it kind of counts. I think it kind of counts as a movie show.
Well, at the very beginning, Eric Radomski and Bruce Timm are at least looking at this movie for the look, because the early film reel sizzle for what became the show's intro uses Michael Keaton's face for Batman very clearly. You can very clearly see it in the
I'd forgotten about that.
What is it, animatronic or whatever they call it? That's not the word, but they use something like that. That it's his
animatic.
Mouth.
Yeah,
animatic. Yes.
Yeah, I'd forgotten all about that. No, that's interesting. But I mean, obviously they're also using the same score. They're kind of rewriting it, but it's that theme.
Yes, which it's technically different versions of it.
Right.
And I guess it really just kind of depends on how much you look at music and how much you can differentiate different versions of music. I'm not a music guy. Noticing those differences doesn't really stand out to me as much. And
yeah, you and I have talked about this. I don't think on camera, but they're different. It's the same melody, but it's syncopated differently.
Right.
And the tempo's different, and it may even be in a different key. I honestly don't remember, but
yeah, I know there are a lot of people who just kind of who look at it just as a kind of like me as a da-da-da-da, anything that follows that kind of flow, that kind of rhythm, as the Batman the Animated Series theme, and not so much this, the theme for this movie, or just look at it as Batman in general. That's just what
again.
Batman
It's sped up. It's more staccato. If you go back to, it has a very similar thing that Star Trek: The Motion Picture and Star Trek: The Next Generation have. Next Gen uses the motion picture theme, and it speeds it up and it syncopates it differently. It's really similar to what we did with this going in the animated series.
That's interesting. That was, at the time, the thought of any kind of new version of a franchise, you kind of keep some of those elements, and now we don't do that at all. Like, I guess in Justice League we brought back the classic Superman theme and the classic, this
at
Batman
like
theme.
The 11th hour. I get the sense that must have had a different score that they scrapped, and Elfman wrote that in like an afternoon.
Yeah, because they scrapped the Junkie XL theme or score. I don't like its use in that movie at all. I don't think it. I don't think Justice League earned the right to use this.
No, no, I hate it. It doesn't make sense at all, and it's really intrusive, right? And you're like, no, that's a different version. Don't do that.
It's so loud in there. It's not like it's a background thing that you're playing with, like they do in Man of Steel, where there's
they did the same thing with the Superman theme. I mean, it's weird because they did it with both.
Yeah, it's just it felt like when I heard it the first time, I was like, oh, that's just in there as fan service. It's not in there as we've earned. I don't want to say you've earned it because, you know, it's a movie. You don't have to earn a callback or using parts of a theme that you own. But it didn't feel like we're watching a Batman that this should fit for. You know, it didn't feel like the Batman we're used to in this universe, the BVS Batman, would, you know, if he had theme music playing every time he went somewhere, it wouldn't be that. It wouldn't be da-na-na-na.
I'm also a purist about it. Really, anything but James Bond, when you reboot, you have different music. Like that should be associated with that version. And when you change it, you're changing the aesthetic and you're changing things about the personality of the character to some degree. Yeah, you do that with the score too, because that's part of the texture of it.
Right, and if you're going to reuse it for whatever you're doing, use it from the beginning. Don't throw it in at the 11th hour of technically the second appearance of that character.
Oh, it's in the... yeah. Well, and also, it's not... we don't even hear it until, like, the third act, if memory serves. Maybe it's earlier. I don't remember. We're just talking about this now.
Yeah, it's when he finds Gordon, I think. Or when he and everyone goes to Gordon, which is probably the end of the second act.
Okay.
I've seen that movie
That's
once.
earlier than I remember it, but...
I think that's when it is, because it's when he drops down. I don't know that movie well enough to talk about it.
I've only watched it twice, yeah.
Watched it double as many times as I have. Which is saying something, because I'm a huge Batman
maybe I
fan.
saw it 3 times. No, I saw it twice in the theater, and I've seen it once since then.
I've got an entire Batman movie collection. Still haven't bought Justice League, which is crazy.
I've got kids, and I was excited they could see it.
Yeah. Especially, I'm sure you haven't shown Jason BVS yet.
I haven't. He asked me about that the other day, and I was like, because you kind of base this on just intellectually where you think your intellectual maturity, where you think your kids are, and
right.
I was like, I think at this point, I probably would let him watch it if he really wanted to. He doesn't seem to really care that much.
He's heard you talk enough about it, like, oh, it's not good. Never mind.
I was like, Jason, when you saw Justice League, did you know Superman had died? He was like, and you know what he said? He goes. Maybe this was even on camera. I can't remember. But he go in the minibus. I forget. But he goes, "Wait, did Batman win?" That's what he said.
Yep, Batman killed Superman.
Which is perfectly illogical. In a movie called Batman vs. Superman, and one of them dies.
Yeah, I would never put those two together like that. It makes so much sense now when you get it from the context of someone who's never seen it.
No, Jason, they just do Death of Superman in the last 10 minutes, and he just goes, what?
That was my reaction when I watched it the third time, when I was looking at it a little more critically and not like, oh my god, they're putting all this stuff on the screen that I wanted to see. It was like, wait, what? You're just throwing that in there?
That was my initial response, yeah.
But getting back to a good Batman movie.
I think this is a good Batman movie.
I do, too. One of the big influences, I think, that I feel is a negative about this movie is it took until 2015, 2016, whenever BVS comes out, to finally get away from an all-black batsuit. And you and I have talked about...
And a rubber batsuit.
Yeah, it's...
I think in previous commentaries I kept saying leather. It's rubber. I don't know what I was talking about.
It's rubber that's supposed to look like leather. Because at least the cape is supposed to look like leather. Because I watched some of the making of commentaries. And they talk about adding texture to the suit to make it look like...
To be fair, the cape does look leathery. I mean, it doesn't look like it's made of the same stuff. But that rubber suit looks like... it must weigh 200 pounds and make it like 200 degrees inside.
Well, if you ask Michael Keaton, it felt like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things that obviously I get sticking with that for the 4 films technically in this continuity. And it's one of the things that kind of influenced not just Batman but everything else. We get to Daredevil, he's in leather. It's not sculpted leather that shows his abs and everything else, but it's...
The X-Men are in all black, and it's also kind of leather.
And they also have to make the joke about, what do you want us to wear, yellow spandex, which if you're not going to do the source material, don't call back to the source material and make fun of it. But that's a whole nother 7 commentaries to do. But no, I think as much as I like this movie, as much as I've grown to like this suit, and I've tried photoshopping it to make it the actual suit look gray and make it as comic book accurate as I can, I have to bite my tongue and say, yeah, they were right to make it all black, because trying to do that in all gray looks kind of dumb, sadly. But I wish that hadn't been something that stuck around, where we look at everything's like, well, it's got to be all black. It's the Batsuit. It's got to be one solid color with a little bit of highlights in the belt or the logo. I feel like that's something from this movie that I can look at as, yeah, it held Batman back on screen in a way that I don't necessarily think it should have. Like, I
think I agree with that. I love it in this film. I don't think it's out of place or anything. I'm not looking at and I mean, some of that is, again, nostalgia. Like, this was kind of my first Batsuit. Sort of. I mean, I watched this and 60s Batman simultaneously, so I can't actually tell you which one I saw first. I'm not sure. But I mean, I grew up with them simultaneously. But, like, in my mind, this is going to sound horrible and blasphemy and whatever. In my mind, Batman wears an all-black suit. Because I grew up so hard with this movie, but he also wears a Neil Adams, like, partially gray suit, too. Like, I love them both, and I kind of can't pick one over the other, but I also don't disagree with you. The Batman Begins version should be wearing something more like a Year One suit.
I agree. Especially if you're doing the all-black logo with nothing behind it. That's just, from a contrast standpoint.
I don't like black on black. It doesn't look good.
No, it doesn't. If you're going to do a black logo on a black suit, change your textures. Make it stand out different in light. Don't make it out of the same material where it's just put on top of it and you don't really see it. Or else, what's the point of that logo? He's already got the Batarang, so he doesn't need the logo on his chest.
Yeah, it's just there because he always has that. That's what the fans are expecting.
Yeah.
Why would he build it that way? I mean, like, if you're gonna do that, and I might be reading too far into things or expecting too much, I feel like if the Batman Begins version feels like he's got to have a big giant bat on his chest, I mean, like, okay, maybe they do explain it well. What I was gonna say is, you need an explanation for why he's branding everything. He does say he's trying to create a symbol, so I guess that's fair. Like, you wear your symbol on your chest. But I don't know.
If nobody can see it, does it really count?
Yeah, in pitch black, is anybody going to see it?
Yeah, or if we go the kind of like comic book traditional route of he's got a big target on his chest to direct bullet fire there where it's extra Kevlar, you want that to stand out more. You want it to have like a big yellow oval around it so people see it, which is one of the things from this movie I love so much is the logo that they use on the actual suit. I love that it's a modification of the traditional logo. It's a little more bat-like. It's a little more angular. It's a little less bulky. Like, it's thinned out a little bit to make room for some of the extra, what would you call those, points at the bottom and at the top. I really love how it looks.
This movie really popularized the yellow circle, and obviously animated series ran with it, and for my whole childhood, that's what Batman wore. It was kind of crazy in the early 2000s to see the comics start using the gray again, because I had never seen it growing up. For me, that was a 1940s thing. It was like, if you do that, you're throwing back to the to original Batman, but it's not like this movie invented that. Neil Adams was doing that.
No, certainly. When Batman the Animated Series does its redesign and becomes the new Batman Adventures, I always hated that they got rid of the actual normal logo. Not normal
Well,
logo,
I think it's weird,
logo, to go
especially because of flashbacks. I mean, when you go back to Mask of the Phantasm,
his first suit has his first black suit on gray.
Yeah, doesn't have the yellow circle. Why does he go back to it? Why is he jumping back and forth? That's weird.
Yeah, in my head, I've always looked at the transition from all black logo to the yellow oval behind it as part of that. He adopts Robin. He tries to become a little more, a little less demonic to not scare the kids, kind of thing.
Right. No, of course. That makes a lot of sense.
Trying to brighten up his own image, literally, with some yellow. So going back to that, going backwards to the black logo on the gray suit, when you're making a show that's supposed to be more about the Bat family in general, just feels contradictory to me from my own like headcanon of what I interpret Batman to be, or how I interpret certain design choices for Batman to be.
Or if you want to make it a symbolic thing or a thematic thing, you have Batman wear that anytime he's starting to lose himself and he's getting darker.
Right, like he adopts that logo again after Jason Todd is murdered, or
or like during nightfall or something,
right?
You know,
Barbara gets paralyzed. You use it to symbolize he's going a little bit farther than he had been previously. He's becoming more brooding, or you're telling a more mature story or something.
In exactly the same way as you put Superman in a black suit because we're supposed to question whether he's really Superman.
Exactly. Something that I wish, going from a negative that I think this movie had on future films to a positive, that didn't get picked up more. I really wish we were doing more prosthetic mouths for the Joker when we do them. Obviously, we do the scars for Heath Ledger's Joker. That's a completely different take, and I don't mind that there at all because it fits the context of what that Joker is. But when you get to Leto's Joker and it's just makeup, it's just lipstick, I feel like that's a Joker that you could get away with doing some kind of prosthetic to make the smile more prominent, or something where you pull back, you go back to this this look of the Joker, this type of prosthetic use and visual look for a character like that.
I'm not going to go that far without knowing more about that Joker. I like there are, just like Batman and again the yin yang thing. Joker has the same thing Batman does, where there's like a bazillion different ways to do that character, and I mean, he's always got to be kind of sadistic, and he's got to be either crazy or pretending like he's crazy. That's sometimes a thing. But I mean, like, so there are things that Joker has to have, but there's things Batman has to have too. He's got to be broody or kind of faux broody to some degree. His parents got killed. He's usually got to have that. But anyway, but but I don't think that Joker has to necessarily always be an accident. He could be a guy who just put face paint on. He could be.
Oh, certainly he could be. But from seeing Suicide Squad and seeing how they're obviously trying to, or at least Leto's obviously trying to be very expressive with his face, I don't know if he's the right actor to pull off some of those expressions without looking kind of goofy. I think it would have benefited more from some use of prosthetics. Maybe not to the extent this is, but I feel like we could have done more prosthetic work.
Man, I would never have thought of that. I'm not going to argue with you on it, but I would have avoided it just because you had one version of the Joker in between these two things, and that's one of the big distinct things about this version, and it's one of the huge things that sets it apart. Like, it's an inspired choice, right? That they thought to put him in a permanent smile, and then he's using Joker gas and putting people in a permanent smile. That's kind of brilliant.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things.
You don't want to rip that off.
No, but we also don't do the permanent smile thing with that Joker. So and because we don't really get a whole lot of who that Joker is, I guess I could buy it more of, he's...
Well, I guess I'm going to ask you a stupid question. I thought this movie made that up.
What, the
permanent smile thing?
Oh, I think it does. I was more talking about Suicide Squad not using that.
No, I know. I'm just saying, like, why would it? This movie did that. Joker doesn't usually have a permanent smile.
Well,
why would it even think to do again? I would stay away from it because you still want to differentiate yourself from the other movies. Like, I don't know why you would want to go with the prosthetics.
You know what? Now that you're saying that, he doesn't. It's always just he's drawn with a very long face, very high cheekbones that kind of give the silhouette of his face kind of a smilish look.
I mean, Mark Hamill's Joker can go into a full-blown,
frown.
Horrifying frown. Yeah, I don't think he usually has that. I'm just saying, like.
No, yeah, you're right.
It's fair to say you think that his expressions look kind of goofy. I don't know that prosthetics would have fixed that. Another reason that you don't want to, I don't mean to argue with you, but another reason that I don't think you want to do that is because very few actors can pull off what Nicholson pulled off with this. You're really constrained by having that.
No, that's a good point. Now that you actually bring up Joker not always having the permanent smile, I never interpreted it as like not having a permanent smile because I always look at singular comic panels, he's always smiling. Or not always smiling, but everyone I go back to and think of, he's got a smile on his face, or he's got some...
I mean, War, Jokes, and Riddles, he can't smile.
True. I was more thinking classic Joker.
Well, yeah, of course, but it's not like he's reinventing Joker that much. Like,
no, I was more just thinking what I envision in my head of traditional classic Joker.
I often think of Joker as having a permanent smile too, but that's because I love this movie. That's because this is in a lot of ways my Joker.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's one of the influences from this movie that I've picked up on through the years that I've just kind of taken for granted as a direct influence from this movie. Is I always envision Joker with some kind of a permanent smile or some kind of a permanent look to his face that makes it look like he's got a smile in some form. Even though, now that I think about it, a lot of the stuff I've seen with Joker outside of movies, he really doesn't. And it's just something I've always just kind of assumed. But yeah, I think this is the first thing that does a permanent smile.
So this is, of course, one of the last major Batman things that will get made before Harley Quinn's invented.
Yeah, Batman Returns obviously would have been before.
No, I'm just saying with the Joker, that uses the Joker.
Oh, yeah, this is the last thing. Is there a big defining Joker story arc in the comics from 90 to, I guess, 90, 93, 92, 93?
I mean, besides stuff we do with him in in Nightfall, I don't think so. But Nightfall happens right after that. Well, it's like 90, 92.
Yeah, I was more thinking something that is a Joker story prominently. But yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Not that I can think of. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a couple things in '89. I forget what, but I don't know if they're like major enough that people remember them.
No, and that would have more just been, hey, we're doing a Batman movie with Joker. Let's put out a Joker story. But yeah,
I forget when exactly Going Sane is. I think that's around that time. Maybe it's a couple years before that.
It could be. Dates are not my thing. But
yeah, no, I know.
I think I've said that like 89 times throughout these videos. But yeah, it's very interesting to see a pre-Harley Quinn take on Joker, or a pre-Batman the Animated Series, just in general, take on Joker, where he's got henchmen, but he doesn't have the Three Stooges type of henchmen, or the Punch and Judy type of henchmen that we get in certain other takes on Joker. Like, is it Killing Joke that's got Punch and Judy, or am I thinking of something totally different?
I think so. I forget.
Yeah, I know.
You're putting me on the spot with that. Yeah. I don't remember.
Sorry. I know they use it in I Am Bane or I Am Suicide, or one of the two from one of those early Tom King Batman runs in a different form. But I've always... But
it is interesting that without the female henchman, the Harley Quinn thing, we still have sort of a female henchman in this.
Alicia? Or
yeah,
okay,
I mean he's using a girl.
Yeah, I've never really made a connection of those two.
And he turns her into like a clown thing.
That's really interesting. I've never really put together that she's kind of like a prototype Harley Quinn type of
sort of, kind of. Yeah.
You learn something new every time you watch Batman 89 7 days in a row.
Yep.
Yeah, that's something I never would have put together on my own. Thank you for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think about this movie a lot.
Obviously, since we're deciding to do 7 in a row.
It comes up a great deal. So yeah, this movie was so huge, it started a trend, finally, of live-action superhero movies on the big screen. We had a couple of things here and there. Darkman also comes out right around this. I think that's released a year after this, maybe, but they're made like almost at the same time.
Yeah, where one wouldn't influence the other's production because of
and Elfman writes both scores, and if you go listen to them, they sound almost identical.
Yeah, in fact, Darkman would be before, because didn't you say it's like a prototype of this score?
It sounds like a prototype, but then somebody corrected me on that at one point and was like, that came out. I need to check the dates again, but at one point I had it in my head that he must have written that before this for some reason. I don't know if that's true. It's probably not, but I had that in my head at one time for some reason. But they are, which is why I avoided that, but they are really similar scores. And obviously Elfman goes back to a lot of his same melodies, a lot of stuff. We're going to do a thing on the music, so we'll talk about that when we get there. But But I just brought that up to mention that that's another superhero thing that happens right around this. But through the 80s, not a ton. Couple of minor things here and there. You had Condor Man, you had a couple of things. And then this movie comes out, and not only does it create not an onslaught like we would later get like what I thought we had in the 2000s, which I now call the growing pains period. Not an Onslaught, because after '08, that's the real Onslaught.
Just wait till we get Onslaught in an X-Men movie, and then you have to find
and then I can't even say that anymore. It's like, it'll be like Inception, like whenever I say, this was problematic from its inception, and then somebody that loves that movie goes, are you dogging on Inception? No, it's a word. It's a word. But that happened. But anyway, I digress. My point is, not only do we start attempting not just superhero movies, but movies based on pulp-era comic books. We'll talk about some of those. They also, most of them, look a lot like this movie. We cannot get away from this aesthetic and this feel.
Oh, certainly. When we do, Dick Tracy, that's a movie that doesn't get made without this. That's something
Right.
that
Of course.
you wouldn't get, which is an interesting place to
The
go.
Shadow is that way. The Rocketeer doesn't look like this movie, but it also doesn't get made without this, I would argue.
No, I would say that's more influenced directly by a retrofuturism, a Fleischer era look, more so than the Gothic look.
No, it is. I'm just saying, because this is a comic book thing, I don't know if that comes out if this doesn't happen. I think we're starting to try comic book things again because this movie was popular.
Oh no, certainly that. Yeah. It's
and
very
obviously,
interesting.
Superman Lives, and
Yeah.
And that is Burton. But I mean, like, a lot of stuff we were trying or didn't even come off the ground was because this movie gets made and is popular.
And it's very interesting some of the choices that got made, where when they look at this movie, they go, "Oh, it was a pulp character that was successful on screen, and not so
Right?
much it was a superhero." Like, you would think the next place to go after here, maybe do a Superman thing, which they were going to do with Superman Lives, which maybe at the time you'd like, well, we already had that, why would we reboot it? Which is kind of an interesting thing to think about now in an era where Batman gets rebooted 3 years later. But
Yeah. Well, the precedent for that is Spider-Man.
True. Another thing very influenced by this movie in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that we don't fully get away from '89 fully. I'm not saying everything is exactly this movie until Spider-Man.
Oh, absolutely.
I think X-Men still takes cues from this movie. It's getting farther away from it. It wants to be more grounded, but it's still taking some cues from this. Obviously, Blade is a different thing, but it's taking some cues from this.
Yeah, you could, and we're still doing a lot of homages to stuff like Punisher Warzone with Jigsaw. We obviously homaged the Doctor scene with Joker, but 2002 Spider-Man, I think you could put the two side by side, and it's a lot of the same beats. It's a lot of the same. The villain is kind of psychotic and doesn't really have a real
much of an
motivation.
endgame.
Yeah, he's just out there doing something. We've got to. Granted, that's more of an origin story. We're spending a lot more time with our main character. We're not having him pull so many weird spider traits like we do with Batman pulling weird bat traits. But you've
got to kill your bad guy at the end.
Right, you got the sadistic choice, which isn't so much here, but is influenced by later Batman films that are influenced by this.
The girlfriend does kind of sort of find out at the end, even though Spider-Man 2, I don't think, realizes that.
Yeah, I've never been quite clear on if she figures it out at the end. I
don't know what that look is, if it's not. I just kissed the guy I kissed, but that's not here nor there. No, you're absolutely
you
right.
Use cherry lip gloss.
This establishes. Well, then why did you make such a big deal out of the reaction? But this movie establishes a lot of the formula that becomes what we think of as the superhero formula, and it's easy to go back and look at this movie and go, man, it's so formulaic. The formula didn't exist yet, and I go and look. I mean, there's some of it maybe in bits of the Superman movies, but like this really solidifies it, and I don't think is really looking at those structurally. And then you get to Spider-Man, and it's like really establishing the formula.
Yeah, that is a movie that's saying, here's the formula for how you make a superhero movie. You just plug in whatever gimmick that character
exactly
has.
And it feels like it already existed and they plugged it in.
Yeah, it does. It feels like someone had an assignment where they were to look at this movie, or were told, hey, go look at the 2, 3, 4 really good, successful superhero movies, find a way to make, the thing that is like lowest common denominator, that it appeals to a general audience type of thing.
And what's familiar, and
Yeah.
they will stick and sit and watch because they already know it and they're used to it.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned that this feels, looking back at it, kind of formulaic. I actually think it's not all that formulaic. We don't have the big giant action set piece that we're used to now in the like end of first act going into second act, where we've got, you know, action every 20 pages in the script or something. There's not a whole lot of action. There's not the big gotta save the world,
It's mostly just the third act.
Yeah. There's the third act of this movie definitely influences where everyone else goes with the superhero genre of, well, we're going to kill the guy at the end so we don't have to bring him back for the sequel, so we can do something else and make money off some of the other characters. Which I think is ultimately the one thing you could point to this and say, yeah, that's probably the one negative that has influenced everything and not just Batman later on.
Yeah. On the other hand, we were already doing that with 80s action movies hard.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of what modern superhero movies are is take a little bit from the action, take a little bit from sci-fi if we're dealing with something a little bit more science fiction based, and then find a way to fit that in with what Batman 89 was, at least for the Growing Pains era, as you call it. Because we had kind of moved away in the 80s and 90s from horror and action dominating pop culture as far as movies go, to finally starting to get to that superhero era of very late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, and obviously now, where we've kind of replaced those two genres as the big pop culture genres that everyone goes to the movies for.
Yeah, we're like, now that's the big thing that's kind of in the zeitgeist. It's weird because superhero movies don't become really a genre until the 2000s.
No, it's more of finding a genre that this character works for and going from there, more so than, well, it's a superhero movie, so let's do the superhero formula with it.
Yeah, and maybe in some ways with Marvel and stuff, we're starting to get back to that a little bit, where we're trying different genres and stuff, but there's still the complaints of the ways in which some of those movies are formulaic, which are valid.
Oh, certainly. I think with Marvel,
and again, a lot of it is just when it feels like it has to degenerate into a big action set piece at the end, when it doesn't necessarily logically or organically get to that place, which is exactly my one problem with the first Iron Man film.
Right, like not everything needs to be a big world-ending problem, or
you still can't explain to me why he puts that giant suit on and outs himself, and like I don't know why Ironmonger is doing that.
Yeah, it's really something where it's like, well, we got to have the big action beat at the end of the third act, and we got to have the villain in the suit, or in whatever their comic book costume is.
And I think sometimes we're too quick to criticize that, because sometimes that is the logical conclusion we get to. When people, and I don't mean to say this is a perfect movie, but of course I love it and I think it's really quite good. When people complain about that with Winter Soldier, I think that's taking it too far.
Yeah, the entire plot of the villains, Hydra in that, is ultimately at the end of it supposed to be kind of world domination. Sort of.
Yeah, and we have set up the helicarriers that are going to crash at the end. Like that doesn't feel like we are being intrusive, and suddenly the whole thing just has to degenerate into a giant action set piece. Like, we were on our way there.
Right, and I feel it's something that just is probably the negative of things becoming so influential, is even if it makes sense for what you're doing to follow the formula, people kind of
if you can see that similarity,
yeah,
it's a problem, and you must have just been plugging in for formula, and that is not always the case. It's just the case so often that it's difficult to see the difference.
And certainly there are times where I think doing the formulaic thing kind of could fit for a character, could fit for an introduction, especially if you're doing something that may not be the safest bet. Do the tried and true formula to see if people will accept this character on the screen. And now we're kind of luckily moving away from that when we've got characters like the Guardians of the Galaxy, Ant-Man, Black Panther, Wonder Woman.
I get why we did that with Spider-Man the first time out.
Right.
And that ended up being probably a really smart money-making move. But I remember in 2002 sitting in the theater having this thought: this feels like every superhero movie ever, and then, wait, how many of those have we even had?
That's a very interesting thing to think of at that time. Because
Yeah.
I remember seeing Spider-Man 2002 with family friends. It had already come out on DVD. I didn't go to the movie theaters. I wasn't quite old enough for my
Did you
parents.
say
to
family
wanna take me.
friends?
Yeah.
Did you say you saw it with family friends?
Well,
Like, friends of your family.
yeah, family and friends both.
I thought you meant, like, friends, like family that you actually consider friends. Where, like, most of your family you don't like, but then these are the ones that I consider my friends.
No, so my mom and her best friend had kids around the same time. Me and my mom's friends' children. So we all hung out a lot together. It was kind of more
Sure.
like family / friends. Like, I kind of look at them as my cousins, especially at that time. So that was one of the
So
first
I
times
was just not thinking about that right. I apologize.
No, you're good. It was kind of a weird way to say it. But yeah, that was the first time I remember seeing Spider-Man 2002. And because, I'm younger and hadn't experienced this movie yet, or any, certainly anything like Blade or X-Men yet. X-Men would come a little bit later for me. Looking at it, be like just blown away by it. Spider-Man's crawling up a wall. It's a real person crawling up a wall. Or it's a real person on a glider gliding. That
sure.
It blew my mind. And then later going into stuff like Fantastic Four or Daredevil, starting to notice, okay, maybe it's because they're all Marvel, but these all kind of feel the same. And then going back
and part
later,
of what makes it feel that way against movies that have some of those similarities but are more character-driven or character studies is exactly that, is that movies like this and like Spider-Man, there is not... It feels like... And Spider-Man maybe less so, but not so much with Green Goblin. He definitely has this problem. It feels like the characterizations and the story are just kind of cookie-cutter framework, or the story at least is a cookie-cutter framework, and the characters are just excuses to put the cool stuff on the screen. So you fill in for the formula because it's just about getting the things and hitting those beats, that you want to put on screen and excite people, rather than actually telling a story where characters do things and there are consequences that make the stuff happen.
Oh, certainly. Or in the case of a lot of the Marvel characters, we bought this license a while back. We need to finally make something with it. We've got a proven formula of what, a comic book movie can be and be successful. We got our own character. Let's just plug it in and go from there.
And I think this movie duped us into thinking that it was more character-driven than it is, just because at the time it maybe didn't feel as much like we were plugging in for some kind of a formula. Like I think about that retroactively. You know what I mean? Where I'm like we were talking about earlier, this is kind of setting the stage in the first place. It's kind of creating the what goes on the other side of the equal sign. And besides that third act, I don't know that there are a whole lot of things I can point to that are structured exactly like this movie.
No, and it's weird that you look at it, not weird that you think of it that way or look back at it like that. Because I've never gone back to look at trailers for this movie, look back at what they marketed it really as, without the context of knowing, going into looking at that kind of stuff, what the film ultimately ended up being. I don't know if I see that as being duped so much, more just because there isn't that pre-existing formula already.
Well, yeah, but I say duped because I think it's just factually incorrect to call this a character-driven movie.
Oh, certainly. This is not. You
see what I'm saying? No, we were duped. Like I said, Ebert saw right through it. He was one of the few reviewers that gave this a mid-range score, because he agreed that it looks beautiful and it's a brilliant aesthetic piece, but it's not actually really about anything, and it feels like a movie that kind of wants to be.
Yeah, and especially when you go back and look at the first draft script, definitely it wanted to be about something at some point in its production cycle. And
at the very least, it's a missed opportunity, because Roger Ebert, in his reviews going all the way up until Begins, would say, look, I read comics when I was a kid, and Batman's a fascinating character. There's a really good character study to put on screen, and I don't mean to say that every movie has to be like art house and really hoity-toity and has to be a character study, and that you can't have just a fun action movie, but those can still have at least simple stories that are driven by things that a character is doing that there are consequences for. There is a middle road between a movie that's just a bunch of cool stuff going on the screen and a movie that I have to watch 3 times before I fully understand.
Yeah.
You know, there's a midpoint in between those, you know?
No, certainly. And there are certainly movies that I think do the idea of telling a story, but mostly being about, we're just going to have fun. We're just going to be an action thing. It's going to be more escapist than this movie ultimately ends up doing with the story it either thinks it's telling or is using as the conceit to get us here.
Yeah, but characters feeling like real people help to drag you through that, so you actually care about those things that are going on.
Right, like you could make the argument that like a Batman and Robin could be a compelling thing if there was more to the character motivations in the story there, other than Alfred's sick and his niece or whatever Barbara's supposed to be. I mean, it just happens to show up at the same time.
And that's kind of a horse of a different color, because that wants to be a straight up comedy, so it just should have done that.
Certainly, yeah. It
just shouldn't have had any of that stuff. I mean, I would look at more like this or Batman Returns as the example.
Yeah, well, I was more going to an extreme point of an example that really doesn't do it all that well at all, compared to something like this that...
Returns is also a pretty extreme example.
Certainly. Oh.
I don't know why anybody's doing anything in that movie. I know why some people are doing some things in this movie.
Yeah, this one, it's we don't get Batman's origin and everything of why he does what he does to the extent we get in other things with Batman, but we get why
the origin. We just don't get in his head. That's the difference.
We get his ultimate motivation, which is parents died, want vengeance or want justice. You know, not ultimately quite sure what one this Batman wants.
Well, but and another thing. Sorry, go ahead.
But we do get in his head enough that I don't question why he's doing anything. I don't question why he's running around doing this. I don't question why Vicky Vale is in the situation she's in. I sort of question Joker, but it's Joker.
And that's why I say I think some of us when I was a kid, were duped a little bit into thinking that these characters were maybe more drawn than they actually are. Another big trope or motif that we keep using after this is the villain that must create the hero.
Yeah, we do that. Obviously, Spider-Man, which is I forget. Is the Spider from Oscorp, or is Norman Osborn just there to drop off?
Initially, I don't think so. I mean, in the movie it is, but in the comics, I don't think it is.
No, yeah, I know the Amazing franchise. It's the Norman. I guess that doesn't really count because that's Green Goblin isn't the villain there, so I'm interpreting.
Oh, actually, now that you say that, no, in that first movie, I guess it's not Oscorp, is it?
No, it's not. I thought he was just there to drop off Harry, which it's been a while since I've seen it.
No, that's just got the standard, like, we're more alike than we're dissimilar, and the villain who asked the hero to join him thing.
Right, and then you get to something like Captain America, where the hero and the villain, the villain doesn't necessarily create the hero, but the necessity of needing a hero to fight that villain, and they're both kind of using that same superhuman formula at a different way to create themselves independent of each other, is a thing. You could go to, obviously, Batman Begins, where Ra's creates Batman through training him. You could go to something like Fantastic Four, where they're created at the same time.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that we go to that all the time, and even to the point of making that one of the big things we change, is because that's part of that formula, or often is, and everybody recognizes it.
Right, and it's an easy conceit to make it feel a little bit more make personal. The story feel more personal, more closed in. You know, it's not like you're having to make a big conceit of why these two things are happening independent of each other and they come together at the same time.
But it can be way too easy and end up feeling really, really convenient.
Certainly, trying to do something that feels more realistic and ultimately ends up feeling less realistic and more convoluted.
Yep.
Because we've got this formula that we're trying to fill in and thinking other people, maybe the perception that, well, if we don't do it this way, audiences won't accept it.
Yeah, and it's usually way too square and kind of easy and on the nose, where like, it can't be enough that Joker is the other side of Batman's coin. They have to be like linked from the beginning.
Right, and maybe talking about influences that aren't from this movie, but I really wish that was something that people were pulling more from The Dark Knight with certain characters. Is you can have a character that's just as kind of out there, as that Joker is, without needing to be tied to whatever that character's origin is. And maybe that's easier because it's a sequel and you've already set up the main character, so you can spend more time focusing on the villain. So maybe that's not the fairest comparison to make of a sequel to a successful franchise to creating a new one from scratch. Or not necessarily from scratch, but starting at a different point.
And we're getting a little bit off topic when I say this, Danny, but also not every villain has to be sympathetic.
No, absolutely not. I think that's one of the big things that I think
or
people
at least
look at.
Okay, they need to be dictionary definition sympathetic. I talk about this all the time. We need to buy that they got to be the person that they are, but we don't have to empathize with them. It's sympathetic versus empathetic.
Right. It seems to be a common misconception that, this character, I sympathize with him, so that makes him a good character. Or, I had to sympathize with this villain for them to be interesting, like Loki. I can sympathize with Loki, so he's interesting.
I want to point to the Joker in Dark Knight when people say that we had to handle Thanos the way we did because if he was just evil, he's not interesting.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was about to bring up Infinity War, and you don't really... Something about an actual Mad Titan, to me, seems more interesting than someone who's killing half the universe because he feels he morally has to in order to make things right in the world.
Well, we've been over this before. We should get off of that, but
yeah.
I just, but yeah, I just thought of that, and I had never really gone there before. I should bring that up more, where it's like, well, no, we don't really know how the Joker became the Joker. We don't know how he got his scars, but nobody complains that they're not interested in that character because they don't feel like he's the hero of his own story. Not everybody has to be Magneto.
Or we don't have. Not every villain needs to be a Magneto. Not every villain needs to be a Killmonger. Sometimes
they don't always have to be misguided. Yeah.
Right. They can just be evil. You can just have a character that. It's easier with Batman where you're doing a lot of stuff that's horror themed, and you can kind of pull from some of those horror aspects of this character as a force of nature, and you got to find some way to stop it.
Well, and Killmonger is less like that because we know who he used to be and how he got to where he is, but he's gotten too far gone, and he's not actually interested in doing the right thing or helping anyone. That's all kind of pretense for what he really wants.
Right. Killmonger's, I think, a really good example of taking the formula and making it work, tying the villain to the hero's origin.
No, that's exactly right.
So one thing I'd really like to see brought back into the mainstream with this movie, kind of the way we've started to bring back Batman 66 and really recognize the love that people have for that film and that show and the influence it had. I'd like to see this movie, I keep doing that. It's like Deadpool and Daredevil. I'd like to see that brought back in some way, in an animated movie or a cartoon like Batman comic, like Batman 66 has been brought back. I think a comic set.
Oh, I know. I want it so bad.
It was,
but my question is, if you did that, would you want to keep Batman kind of distanced? Like, would you want to see if you could do purely what Tim Burton is attempting, but find a way, sort of like we're doing with the Power Ranger comics, right? Where we stay pure to what the initial ideas and intentions are, kind of, but we just make it more sophisticated and we draw it more.
I think what I would do ultimately if I had full creative control over a Batman 89 comic, start from where this movie ends, ignore anything from Returns on, and try to follow what this movie sets forth of what you think this world looks like afterwards, what you think this Batman does, what you think that original vision for this movie was, and just try to keep going in that same direction.
Sure, but I guess what I'm asking is Batman the central protagonist or not?
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't know. I could see going either way. I would maybe write something where Vicky was the protagonist and Batman was more or less in the background, but then...
You know what I'd do?
You could also make the argument that once they're together, that's when you humanize him. So, you can maybe have your cake and eat it, too, where Batman's a little bit more distanced in this, and then the sequel is where we really come to understand him because more or less we've made him a hero in this. You can argue whether his dropping Joker off the building makes him a hero, but But that's supposed to be the idea, right? And so once you've done that, now we can get into his eccentricities and say, no, we wanted you to think that maybe he was a crazy person, but now, like, he's eccentric, but he's not straight up crazy, so now we can get you in his head and you can actually start to sympathize with him.
That's a really good idea of using Vicky. I wasn't thinking of using Vicky for it. I was thinking of using either Alfred or introducing Robin and using them as our main eyes into, you know, that's the character we're following, and then Batman is kind of here with us as well.
See, I would wait on Robin, man. I'd love to see another, you know, good arc or two or story or two before you introduce Robin, just to, like, really get to know this guy, if that's how you're doing it. Otherwise, I think you could also tell a story where you put him way more in the background and you have, like, a Knox-type character that just, you know, occasionally deals with Batman, but it's more about his world and Batman's just, you know, in the background.
Yeah, I think a cool place to go for the sequel to this, if you were to ignore Returns and everything forward or after that, follow Two-Face. Focus on where Harvey Dent would go to become Two-Face with Batman just by himself, and kind of follow that direction if you want to keep it, you know, keep some distance before we get to Robin, or, you know, keep following just a solo Batman or a Batman who doesn't have a sidekick per se.
Or you do like a story where you try to make Batman Returns make more sense, and it turns out that Robin was there all the time. We just never saw him. And I've always wanted to rewrite Batman Returns as a real story.
I'd like to remake that movie without the super grotesque penguin.
I think you can make. I still think you can make that work.
I've always liked the just the normal looking penguin who's got the really long nose.
No, I know. I like that a lot too. But I was trained a long time ago to try to make stories like more effective at what they're trying to do. I think you can make that penguin effective. I imagine there's another alternate universe somewhere where Nolan's, you know, a normal person. I feel like there's got to be an alternate universe somewhere where Nolan's Dark Knight movie has a Joker that everybody just detests and hates, like a lot of people did the Penguin in Batman Returns, and then people are like, and then somebody like me would come along and be like, well, no, you could probably make that work.
Yeah, and everyone writes you off as a crazy person for thinking you could do something cool with that.
That's
terrible
my point.
Joker. Yeah,
that's the point I'm making.
Yeah, I certainly think you could do something interesting with the grotesque Penguin, who is kind of the reverse Moses, where he's kicked out of the very affluent family and is forced to live in the sewers and is forced to make his own way in that horrible situation, and then he comes to the forefront, and then his main antagonist is maybe more so Bruce Wayne than Batman, and because there's a Batman there, he just naturally is going to have to deal with that character as well. Or maybe you even do something where his main antagonist is Batman, is you're a grotesque, demonish looking creature, but everybody loves you. Why do they fear me? Kind of a thing.
Yeah, and you make it about, like, you know, the lottery of life, like, right? Like, you know, I never thought of this before. You know, the obvious way to introduce Robin in these movies?
Find someone who loves bird watching? You
put Penguin. Sure. You put Penguin in a circus, and they work in the same circus.
Oh my, that's genius.
Like, obviously, because Penguin had, like, a circus gang, and he was thought of as, like, a freak of nature, and you just have him in a traveling circus, and he's in the same circus that Dick Grayson is in.
Right, and he can be the one who tries to sabotage the circus for some reason. And that's what leads to the Graysons dying. That's a great idea.
I mean, Robin originally was supposed to be in that movie. He was supposed to be in this movie, too. But at one time he was in Batman Returns also. And I don't know what the context was with that. I've never read a draft that had him in it.
That sounds like something that
I don't know.
Might have gotten left out, because I think the only, like, concept art for Robin is from this movie, and I think it would have just been one of those things that, yeah, let's put Robin in the sequel, and then it just never really pans out in any kind of.
But I'm curious. Script. You remember we talked about this with the Bob the Goon commentary. They put out an action figure for Robin for Batman Returns,
right?
And I don't know if that's just because Robin's a popular character and we hadn't solidified how we do action figures yet, or if at the time they made the figures they still thought he was in that movie. But if that were the case, there must have been a draft with him.
Yeah, if they were making figures because they thought he would be in it, certainly they would have made a figure that used the costume that they were planning on using for him. You know, some concept art that they would have gotten of this is where we're going to go with this design, or they would have waited maybe some, or maybe it could just be a thing.
I have no idea what the process was with that. If anybody knows more about that than I do, let us know, because usually I would think that you don't do, you know, figures until you know who's playing the characters and you have stuff on film.
Unless you're Star Wars and you're just going, you know, by the seat of your pants.
That's fair.
Maybe. Well, it's Kenner that did Returns figures, I think. Matt, watch it be Toy Biz again, and I'm wrong again after correcting myself on the last one. But maybe they just went ahead and made it, and not really caring about it being accurate to,
well,
to
of course,
what Robin looked like.
They made vehicles and things in Batman and Robin based on toys that were already being designed.
Right. They... I'm trying to think back to some of those Toy Biz figures, because I was doing my research on those after I realized I was wrong about it being not being Kenner who made the original ones. They seem to be trying to make the figures look like these characters. You know, it wasn't like they just had a basic generic Batman mold and just painted it all black, or did that with the Joker. Obviously the faces aren't going to look like them, but it seemed like the process at the time for making this movie's figures would have been make it look like the movie. So I don't know why that would necessarily change going into Returns, unless the idea was, well, let's just put out more Batman characters for it. So maybe the idea for Robin wasn't necessarily... Maybe the idea of including a Robin figure wasn't necessarily because they were under the influence that it would be in the movie, but more so, we got to give Batman a character that he can play with that's on his side too.
So, I think obviously the Joker was already popular before this movie came out as you know, Batman's big foe, but was made way more popular by this movie. I wonder, I mean, a lot of kind of what if kinds of scenarios, but like, first of all, could this movie have been as big of it as it was without the Joker? Do you have to have that? I mean, I think you had to have Jack Nicholson. I think you needed a big name. But if it was like somebody else playing some other character, like, did it have to be the Joker? Is that like 50 to 75% of the success of this movie?
I think you could have made this movie with the Riddler, and it would be just as well known. You could probably do it.
Wow, at the time, I don't know about that. I mean, yeah, I guess Riddler was maybe even more popular in the '60s show than Joker was, or they were maybe on par just with that show. I don't know.
It's hard for me to think about it with the context of what people in 88, 89 would have associated as far as villains go with Batman. But trying to look back on the big ones from Batman 66 that you could go to for just name recognition in themselves, I think of Riddler, Catwoman, and Penguin as far as characters outside of Joker that you could really go to and say, yeah, people will latch on to this movie with this character as the villain, at least. I think you could do something with the Riddler in this and not change up a whole lot of what's going on in this movie and make it work, and I think people would still buy into it. Maybe it wouldn't be as successful without the Joker, because the Joker is one of the things that you really sell this movie on, because it's Jack Nicholson, and maybe if you get Jack Nicholson to play another character, you can still sell the movie and people still go to see it. But I don't really know.
I guess I asked that to ask how much this movie has to do with the popularity of the Joker now.
I think without this movie, the Joker isn't as big of the character that we think of with Batman. Like, we think Batman and the Joker. I think it may be one of those things where we kind of think of it as Batman, kind of the way we think of Spider-Man. We don't necessarily always think of Green Goblin. Maybe people who aren't as familiar with the character do, but because they're two characters that have such a huge rogues gallery, I think without Joker from this movie being so big and becoming so popular, maybe it would become a thing where Batman isn't so tied to one villain, and it's just kind of, yeah, he's got a bunch of different villains he fights.
I mean, I would make the argument, I mean, obviously Batman has a big rogues gallery, and different characters are of different tiers of popularity. I would make the argument that comic book wise, Batman was always tied to the Joker like that. But as far as the mainstream public goes, like, people that don't read Batman comics, that like Batman, you know, think of it that way and love the Joker. And like, you know, like, Hamill has a lot to do with that. And obviously, you probably wouldn't have gotten that if you didn't have Joker in this movie, because that show wouldn't have gotten made the same way if it got made at all. I don't know. It's hard to say. But
it's really hard to think about what the influence of that show has on popularity of the Joker.
I guess that, yeah.
Like, does Joker become as big of a character if people are automatically... Or the common name I always hear thrown out for Joker is always Mark Hamill, or is always Batman the Animated Series Joker. Not so much this one.
I mean, it's Nicholson with an older generation, certainly. Or people that were huge into this movie but didn't bother with the cartoon show. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the answer to that question is probably just we keep reinvigorating the interest in that character when we cast it right.
Right, yeah, or we've got, you know, in comics, a really interesting story to tell that's not just doing the whole, like, character study of what these two characters mean to each other, like Endgame is.
Yeah,
when you do something interesting like
page.
Yeah, when you do something interesting like War of Jokes and Riddles with the character, you're introducing more people to a new, maybe not so much new interpretation of the Joker, but a new story to tell with that character that invigorates people's interest in the character so much, which I haven't really seen a whole lot lately.
I know there's a lot of people that love Batman kind of like some people seem to love Buffy, where it's more about the other characters and the villains than it is about the actual principal character. I think there are Batman fans that don't care about Batman.
Oh, there's certainly I know people who like Nightwing, don't really care for Batman, who love, you know, Barbara Gordon or Cassandra Cain, or, you know.
But with Batman, sometimes it's more about the villains even than it is.
Yeah,
some of the supporting characters.
Outside of comic book fans, I know a lot of people who are huge fans of the Joker, specifically Heath Ledger's Joker, who don't really care about Batman all that much. It's more about the Joker.
And I think this movie might have started that a little bit. I mean, one of the big complaints that people who don't care for this movie lob at it is that the Joker's in too many scenes and he kind of takes over. And that's why people were really worried that was going to happen with Dark Knight.
Yeah, I can see that complaint. I don't know if I necessarily agree with him being in it too much. I think this is a movie that's just as much about the Joker as it is about Batman. And I don't know if that's necessarily a problem with it, but that definitely is something that I think has kind of influenced how other movies go about handling their villain.
I mean, I think as far as, again, story-wise with this movie, the bigger issue is it's not so much that we see the Joker too much over Batman. It's that if you want to distance us from Batman and you don't want us in his head, you probably need a character that we can latch onto. And if the Joker's on screen too much, I kind of get that interpretation of, well, wait, is he supposed to be the character that I'm more identifying with? And it was more Vicky and Knox in the original script, but also that Batman was more human in the first place.
Right. So with that one, you don't need to distance yourself so much from him as a human to begin with. I'm trying to think of other movies. That would have been how I would have done it if you wanted to distance us from Batman. Right. You get in the head of Vicky Vale.
Yeah.
So you can still stay close to Batman, but not be in his head.
Yeah, it was kind of a buddy journalist thing, and then you kill Knox at the end.
Which would be a very interesting take on... I mean, certainly we wouldn't do any Batman thing now where we're not in his head. We're not following him around, but it'd be really cool to follow kind of a Sam and Twitch type of thing.
Yeah.
Where you're putting the focus on people following around, you know, doing kind of the... We're following the reporters, we're following the cops who are investigating this, and Batman is still lurking in the shadows as the urban legend type of character before we do more of getting into his head.
I mean, I sort of like that as a not to just rewrite this movie, but I sort of like that as a kind of a sequel idea. You know, where we don't know Batman that well, and then the next thing you do with him is you finally get in his head.
Yeah, you've got people around him who can introduce you to him more, so it makes sense that you're getting into his head more instead of just completely changing who your protagonist of the piece is in the sequel.
So you have a lot of people, younger than me, I guess like Danny's age or younger, that think of Batman again differently than how he's represented in this movie, and don't love him from this movie. Danny, what things, regardless of what you like about this movie or whether you've even seen this movie, will stick around forever?
About this movie?
Yeah. And I don't even mean just things that like influence other things that other things will keep around. Just what things will never die in the public consciousness that this movie gave us.
I would have to say the Batmobile.
That's the biggest one, right?
Right.
And probably this theme.
Oh, absolutely, this theme. And I think you could make the argument that it's more of stuff after this movie, like the animated series, obviously, that uses the theme that people might associate that theme with. But I think
But it gave it to us first.
Exactly. It gave it to us
It will never die.
No. I kind of wish it would just be retired permanently instead of used in Justice League. Not to go back to that point. But yeah, kind of on that same point, when you think of Batman, you think of anything related to Batman, Gotham City, his supporting characters. Is there anything when you close your eyes about Batman or about the Batman mythos that you see this movie's version of that in your head the first, when you think about it first?
Once again, definitely this car.
Yeah.
That's the biggest one. This might sound like a weird one. This bat signal.
Yeah, see, my go-to is going to be Gotham City, because this is what I envision Gotham City looking like if it was, a real place.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's the iconic bat signal, I would think. That's the one that, even if we don't use that exact thing, we use that logo for any kind of bat signal toy we make.
I mean, you can make the argument that it's kind of generic, but it's, I guess that's the one I think of.
But it works perfectly. It's completely it's a perfect circle. It's fitting that traditional logo into a circle that works for any kind of a signal that you're going to use. If you're going to use it in a movie, if you're going to use it in advertising, you're going to use it in the comics, you're going to use it in toys. It's kind of the perfect bat signal logo, I think.
Yeah.
You don't have to do the thing with, not to go back to BVS, but you got that really big logo that doesn't have very distinct points, so when it shines up in the sky, it just looks like a weird V that you could almost mistake for the Nightwing logo.
Oh, and going along with that, and this might just be a me thing, but I'm like that with this Batwing too. Anybody brings up like a Batman plane, that's what I always think of.
It's weird. Anytime I think of a Batman plane, I think of the Batman Beyond one, which is a lot like this one. Batman
Beyond has a plane.
The Batwing thing that Terry's in.
Oh yeah, sure. I momentarily forgot he even has that because he has wings and he glides around on them. And I haven't watched that show in like 6 years. Yeah, he doesn't use it a lot, does he?
He uses it a lot because I remember a lot of that show having that red tint to it that he has when he's in that thing because everything.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry. Now that you say that, now I'm thinking about it. Yeah, and I've seen that whole show. I just haven't thought about that in a long time. Yeah, okay, no, that's fair. Yeah,
that's.
But it's still shaped like a bat symbol, right?
It's very much shaped like this Batwing, which I think is another very intentional homage to this movie.
This Batwing was one of the first toys I ever owned, and it was and it's die-cast, and one of the like under wing things broke off almost immediately, and I always had that thing. I probably still have it actually with that wing broken off. I would love to get that again.
I wish I still had my Batman the Animated Series Batmobile, the one that pulled out and it had the bat wing with it.
Yep.
I love that so much. It was. So
I never had one. I had friends that did. I never had that.
It was so cool. I loved it so much.
I miss my big heavy, or not, it wasn't heavy, but I miss my big '89 car. But I got rid of it at one point just because it wasn't in the best shape and it's so bulky. I had nowhere to put it.
I'm thinking of getting the Hot Wheels Batmobiles because I got the '66 one that came with the box set.
Oh,
and I like to just get a collection of those because that'd be cheap and easy to get, and those are pretty easy to find from what I've experienced.
Thought about getting those cars that Eagle Moss puts out, but there's so many of them, and I couldn't just get a few. I'd have to have them all.
Yeah, I haven't really looked a whole lot into those. My
Oh,
Batman
they're
collection
awesome.
has moved more into Batman the Animated Series direction than just Batman in general.
Well, I don't know if you know about those, the Batmobilia thing, but those are like nearly every car that was ever in anything. They go to really obscure stuff.
Oh, that's interesting. So you've got like the Brave and the Bold car. You've got obviously a Tumbler, and like
Yeah, but they go to weird stuff too, like one shot appearances of things in comics, and like
they go to the
weird
comics
stuff.
too.
Oh yeah,
I was thinking
there's
it'd
like
be more.
There's like 80 of them or something. I forget, but like no, I'll send you something about that. It's nuts. Yeah, and Eagle Moss did the same thing with Star Trek ships.
Oh, that makes so much sense. That's great. Did they do one with Star Wars?
No, I don't think they have that license, but
Oh, okay. That'd be another easy one to do. But going back to Batman Beyond for a second.
yeah,
One of the things you hear all the time is people want to see Michael Keaton come back as Batman for like a Dark Knight Returns or a Batman Beyond movie, just to play an older Bruce Wayne.
in exactly the same way we used to say that about Adam West.
Yeah, which is very interesting to think in a couple, maybe 10 years or so, people will be saying the same thing about Christian Bale or Ben Affleck.
Mm-hmm.
But I would really love to see Michael Keaton come back to this universe and play this Batman, obviously in a future older Batman or maybe in an animated movie set in this universe. I think that would be such a cool thing.
If we did a live action like Dark Knight Returns set in this universe, that would be a like pinch me, I'm dreaming kind of moment. Like that would be like the Tick getting a more serious, sophisticated TV show. Like I still can't believe that exists. And I would not believe you if you told me that was happening.
I would be so stoked for that, especially if they did Dark Knight Returns, they're going to bring back Joker. If
Nicholson could come back, yeah,
that would be amazing. I would pre-order tickets, obviously, for that.
Oh, I would just lose my mind. Yeah.
I'd collect anything and everything that had anything to do with the merchandising for that, like I did Batman v Superman. I'd get all the Funkos. I'd buy the cereal.
It's not likely that anybody would even think to do it, but the direction that Warner's is going with their movies now, it doesn't sound impossible.
No, I think we could have a very good chance of seeing that done as an animated movie, where we bring Nicholson and Keaton back at some point. I would
just the way we did it with 66, yeah.
Exactly, which I would hope they could do before either of them pass. Like we were lucky enough to get 2 with Adam West returning, which I love those movies.
They're great, and there are some good sound alikes, but yeah, just you get everybody back that you can. But even if it happened after we lost Nicholson, there's still other characters you could go to.
Oh, certainly you would. Like pipe dream is to have both of them come back for something. You obviously could do it with just Michael Keaton and then bringing Danny DeVito if you wanted to do Penguin again. Bring
sure,
or
Williams
just back, or just do completely new stuff with them.
Bring Michael Keaton back, and just do a villain you never did, but in this aesthetic.
Right. Which I think we're at a point where 5-10 years from now, we will see a new admiration for this movie emerge.
Why do you say that?
In the way that everyth's cyclical. I keep doing that. Cyclical. The way that 66 kind of came back into the forefront with, granted that probably had more to do with.
Why that timetable? Right. There would have to be an impetus. Like what would it be that would suddenly make that happen?
I think it will be, either in a new Batman show being made, or depending on what Matt Reeves does with his Batman. We're instantly dating this by talking about this.
Right.
I think because creators are at an age now where they were being influenced by this movie specifically, and stuff related to this movie that was influenced by it, we might see a new return to some of the stuff about this, where it's more stylized and less about the Nolan look.
So I would make the argument that 89 still has enough of a fan base and there's enough nostalgia attached to it, because we have been going to a lot of 80s stuff lately with nostalgia territory, that I don't think you would need anything else to make it suddenly come back in the public consciousness to get somebody to want to make an animated movie about it. I think you just need the right person in that department that pitches that. And then, like, I guess my point is, I think that would be the thing that would get people excited about 89 again, potentially.
Yeah.
But I don't think you would need some other impetus before that happened.
Yeah, maybe it wouldn't need the 5 or 10 years like I was saying. Maybe it wouldn't even need something like that. I was just more thinking, like, there's the pattern that seems to emerge of every 10 or so years we kind of go back to something new. Or not new, but we're closing in on 30 years of this. So, you know what? My timetable was wrong. I was looking at the time of it different.
It's just with 66, it was because finally the license issues got fixed and we were able to put that show out.
Yeah, so
we started merchandising it again. We still merchandise 89. Not a lot, but we do.
I guess we do get, like, the NECA toys. We still get Batmobiles. We still get Hot Toys for this. Yeah, maybe it wouldn't take a big cultural change or an impetus to do it. I just take the right person, or who knows.
Because I have such a nostalgia thing with this movie, I don't know for other people how well this is aged.
Well, I know a lot of people from my age group don't really talk about this movie a whole lot.
Yeah.
It's Batman the Animated Series.
That's my point, is I don't know, even if you brought it more into the public consciousness or whatever, if those people would ever care about this movie. If they, I think that, because I don't think we brought a bunch of kids into 66 when 66 got popular again. I think that was for all of us that were there already. And I'm just saying the same thing would happen with 89.
I think if I showed my cousins, who are younger, considerably younger than me, the 66 animated movies, they have no frame of reference for the original show. They would enjoy that a lot and be very interested in that Batman. I know when I showed a friend of mine, we were watching the movies. We were trying to decide on a movie to watch, and I suggested we watch 66, Return of the Cape Crusader. She was fascinated with it and really liked what it was doing, without me explaining what some of the references to certain things were. And I think you could potentially have that with this movie, especially with an era of people my age who love anything Tim Burton. Like, I know a lot of people my age who love Edward Scissorhands, Nightmare Before Christmas, which is not technically a Tim Burton movie like this or Edward Scissorhands are. But I think if you were to show them something done in this aesthetic, they would be drawn to it without necessarily knowing a whole lot about this movie.
I would also make the argument that if you animated this, you might end up with just something that looks kind of like animated series. Like,
I think you could go more stylistic and go more in that Tim Burton style with it.
You'd need more detail, right? Like you'd have to go.
Kind of.
I'm not thinking of good examples, but
not photorealistic, but you have to make it look more kind of caricature-ish, where it's obviously that's Michael Keaton's face animated, obviously that's Jack Nicholson's face animated. I think to make it stand out more.
Yeah, you need realistic detail in the backdrops. I think. I mean, like you'd have to go kind of full-scale anime or something.
Yeah,
I don't mean make it an anime, but I just mean, when you would need the realism of something like Ghost in the Shell or something. I think.
Yeah, you need more life in the background, more texture, more. Not so much doing what we do with every...
Just lines.
Yeah. Not what we do with every animated DC thing now, where it's just a bunch of CG in the background, but something that's drawn, looks very gothic. You could almost reach out and touch, the stones if we were to animate this scene, and the bricks and all that kind of aesthetic stuff.
How would you feel about a straight-up animated remake of this movie that just had more of a sophisticated story?
I would be so interested in that.
Really?
Especially if we did something that was kind of taking more from the first draft script. Kind of adding some of that sophistication, some of that character motivation into it. I would love to see something like that done. I would love to see something where... Or at the very least,
take one of those early drafts and do a comic book like we did with, the Star Wars and Sit on the Edge Forever and stuff like that. But it would be really cool to see it as an animated movie.
I think so too. I think maybe it's because the anime series is so much based on this. I'm all for seeing more of this kind of style animated, because we've seen how it looks when it's done very well and done, for a cartoon. Obviously, if you dedicated an entire team to working on a movie and trying to make it feel more like this and less like a derivative of that while still being its own thing, you can make something really, really fascinating, both visually and story-wise, where we've kind of figured out how to do more mature Batman stories and make it work.
I would even go as far as to say I think you could about do it in 80 minutes.
I think so too. I think you could trim some fat from what's in this movie, scale some stuff back, make it shorter. Maybe cut out. Well, I'm trying to think if you want to cut out Jack Napier being the person who kills Batman's parents.
Yeah, I mean the biggest question is how much do you rewrite it?
I think,
you bring back Batman riding on a horse and all of that stuff. Like,
yeah, you could go obviously more into the 80s materialism factor, maybe make it more about materialism of today's era, less of the 80s. But I think you could do a whole lot with what was there in some of the earlier drafts of this movie. And I think you could almost make the definitive animated Batman movie.
Do you?
I think so. I think sophisticated storytelling, and I hate to use the term sophisticated storytelling in a way that makes this seem like I'm knocking what this film does with the story, but something like that where you do a more...
I mean, it can definitely be improved on. This third act is kind of nonsense. Like, no, I'm not. I don't mind knocking that. I think that's the weak thing about this movie, and it's one of my favorite movies. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, telling a more sophisticated story, keeping this visual, I think that's like the perfect meld of what Batman is. I think that's like, at least in my mind, that's exactly what I picture Batman being, and I would even be okay with him doing the all-black batsuit for that, because we're doing this universe animated.
You've got to. You could maybe make certain parts of the suit a little bit lighter than other parts and give it more of a contrast, I guess. But
right, you find a way to do the cape a different way so it stands out from the suit, because you can't do a leather texture animated the way you can.
Yeah,
live action.
And you'd have more license to have let the cape be bigger.
Right, you let the cape be bigger, let stuff like the boots and the gloves kind of have more of a shine and more of a contrast when they hit the light, so those stand out from what the actual suit is. Maybe make the suit feel more matte and everything else feel like it's shining a little bit more or has some different kind of texture to it.
So with the time we've got left, I want to go back to more of the influence and legacy and stuff that this movie has done for us or changed in the culture beyond just how it's affected other movies and other superhero things. This was the first big... I mean, there are a lot of firsts with this movie. We kept getting bigger with a lot of things with set building and expense and stuff after this. This is one of the most expensive movies ever made up to that point. The one of the biggest things, of course, is the Prince soundtrack. We do that kind of thing all the time after this.
Yeah, in fact, we Black Panther just did it with they brought Kendrick Lamar in to do a soundtrack where he brought in a bunch of big hip hop, R&B, pop singers and songwriters and artists to come in and do a soundtrack. And when I first heard that and first listened to the album or that soundtrack, I immediately thought, oh, this is kind of doing that Prince Batman '89 thing where a lot of the music isn't in the movie. There's only like 2 songs I think in the movie from the Black Panther soundtrack. But I was like, I wish we were doing more of this, where we just have an artist come in, make a soundtrack with, kind of loosely based on this movie, and even if it's not in the movie so much, it's kind of that artist's take on whatever the story of that movie is.
Yeah, in the 2000s we did a lot of in and inspired by, where it wasn't like one artist that did a whole soundtrack. And we would sometimes, some of those songs would be in the movie and some of them wouldn't be, like the Daredevil soundtrack and the Spider-Man soundtrack and stuff like that.
You've got Hero in Spider-Man 2, you've got Bring Me to Life in Daredevil.
Daredevil, yeah.
Is there something from...
Fantastic Four had one. I forget what that was. It was a... I can't remember who now. It wasn't Green Day. It was somebody.
No, it was another one kind of like that like post-punk type of music.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did Blade have anything?
Oh, I think maybe it was a Nickelback song. I forget.
I thought Nickelback is the one who does Hero. Well, it's Chad Kroeger.
Well, that was Chad Kroeger by himself, but I think there might have been another Nickelback song. And then, like, Punisher had a popular soundtrack. So, yeah, we did that a lot, but it wasn't as often one artist. But, I mean, there are other movies that have done that.
Yeah. Punisher's the one that brings in Seether, isn't it? Or
yeah.
at least, that's what I thought. Man, now we're bringing it back to mid-2000s rock.
Yep.
So if there was...
But also, real quick, the merchandising with this movie is another hugely influential thing.
Oh, absolutely. This is one of... This really kind of sets the template for what you do with...
Summer blockbusters.
Well, obviously with advertising a summer blockbuster, but, like, merchandising it. And I'm kind of surprised that merchandising for this movie still isn't huge. Like, we're not... If I were DC, I think I'd be putting out a lot more stuff with merchandise from this movie. Licensing out a bunch more stuff still.
So, here's the thing. They do in a way. This, like we talked about earlier, this is the bat symbol that stuck around.
Right.
And they put that on everything, and this movie really popularized that. That's the thing that stuck around from it. As far as, like you know, characters and figures and things like that, and just this movie being merchandised on T-shirts and hats and whatever, you just have other Batman things that, not a lot right now, but even as of a couple of years ago, were just whatever the big thing was that they were selling. It's sort of like Power Rangers, where it's just they're going to sell whatever the current thing is until there's an anniversary.
Right.
Although they've never made a big deal out of the anniversaries for this movie.
I think next year for the 30th they might.
I wish they would. That'd be great. I don't know that they ever really have, but
have they put this out in 4K yet? Because that would be the time to do it. If they haven't put it out in 4K, that would be a good time to put it out in 4K. Do a whole bunch of special features with it if you wanted to. Especially because that'll fall around the time the DC Universe is kind of gaining steam. Make a whole big thing out of it. Do a Batman Day, again, focused on this instead of Harley Quinn like we did this year or last year.
And like we have we did that last year, and I think this year we just went back to Batman Day.
Oh, we did? Okay.
So this Joker killing Batman's parents thing did not stick around.
No,
that's not a thing we ever felt the need to come back and do again.
It's funny that doing a definitive origin of who Joker is kind of hasn't stuck around either. A lot of people still think of Joker as, no, he has to... We're not supposed to know his origin, even though this movie gives the origin. You think that might be something that sticks around. Like, the name Jack Napier has stuck around a lot, and that doesn't originate here. But when people think of, like, pre-Joker, they think of Jack Napier, but they don't necessarily think of a definitive story.
Wait. Jack Napier doesn't start here?
I thought it predated this. I thought that's from...
I don't think that's true.
Oh, okay.
I'll check into it and make sure, but I don't believe that's true.
Oh, then if
by the way, the thing I looked up the thing with Robin. Apparently, in the earliest like drawings and ideas for that movie, he was lumped in with the bringing back Two-Face idea
for Returns.
Yeah, for Returns.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense because they were still. After this one gets made, that was kind of the idea going into it, was expand on what we had done. That not necessarily seeded, but what we had already put into this one. Not so, which ultimately isn't what they ended up doing with that one, where they kind of went in a completely new direction with some of the characters that they used. Looking up the Jack Napier thing.
I am. That's what I'm doing right now. We also can't stop dropping villains from high places, but that's also an action movie thing.
Yeah, it's just as much a Die Hard thing as it is a Batman thing. Oh, it is coming from... Yeah, Jack Napier Identity was created by Sam Hamm and Warren Scarron for the film.
That's what I thought.
89. Oh,
yeah.
I was wrong. I could have sworn it predated it by something.
And we use an animated series, too. That's one of the few big things that we kept from this movie. It's funny because that's a lot of people's definitive Joker, but they kind of gave him a backstory.
Yeah, they do, because they've got the Creeper episode where they pretty much spell out how Joker became Joker, which is kind of weird to think. How does normal layperson in that universe's Gotham City know how Joker was created? Did Joker give an interview to Lois Lane and kind of in a Superman the movie esque scene?
Well, and of course we see him before he becomes the Joker in Phantasm.
Yeah, which is
I think probably where the Napier name first is in that show.
It probably is, but I'm trying to think off the top of my head, does anything from Mask of the Phantasm contradict with what they do in the origin for...
I'm not sure. That's what I was trying to remember, too.
Because I think, if I'm remembering that Beware the Creeper episode right, he's in the Red Hood thing. He's kind of played like the bumbling fool who's kind of being set up as the patsy because he trips over his cape and falls over, but I don't know if we get anything with him as being known as a mob boss, or if he was just, if they go more
Well, and he wasn't a boss, he was just a thug.
Yeah, that's right, because he was just working for, who's the main boss in Phantasm? I'm blanking on that name.
Yeah, I can't remember his name right now.
It's not Beaumont, because that's Andrea's father.
Yeah, it's that's what I was going to say, as the other guy.
Yeah. Well, you learn something new every day. I could have sworn Napier predated this movie.
No, and I always wondered if that was an homage to Alan Napier.
Yes, it is.
Is it? Did they do that on purpose?
Yep. Where does it say it right here? I had it. Yeah. This is a tribute to the actors Alan Napier and Jack Nicholson.
Okay.
At least from the Wikia about this movie. Or
that might just be an assumption they're making. I mean, you can't be totally sure of that, but...
Yeah, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But
I'll look at that article at some point and see if there's a source for that. That always seemed kind of coincidental if it wasn't. Alan Napier played Alfred in '66, for anybody that doesn't know.
I would...
And his, I think, grandson... or a kid related to him, but I think it's his grandson. I don't know if I'm right about that. But that's the... I've mentioned this before, but that's the Red Ranger, Connor in Dino Thunder.
Really?
Yep.
Huh. Interesting. Small world is Hollywood.
Yeah. And he's a major independent director in New Zealand now.
Apparently Alan Napier's birthday is 3 days after mine. Interesting.
Sure.
Even smaller world.
Well, I mean, there's only 365 days to choose from,
366.
I mean, statistically, it's gonna, yeah. Sure.
So everyone shares a birthday with somebody.
So here's a question: who would you say is, and I mean, maybe this is just different for every person, but like maybe it's like Batman, where a lot of people have a different Batman. But who would you say is the Alfred that the majority of people think of when they think of Alfred?
Batman the Animated Series, Alfred.
Use their one. See, I don't know about that.
I think it really just depends on what your first introduction to Batman is, I think.
Or is it the one that's, like, interlocked with the Batman that's supposed to be your Batman?
That's probably it, yeah.
Because for the longest time, I always thought of this one first.
This, if I think live action, this is the one I think of, because I don't... Mainly because Michael Caine doesn't look like Alfred to me. So
yeah,
I always think
fair
of
enough.
These
I mean, obviously, he's more interesting, but, like, I feel like this Alfred's, like, quintessential.
Yeah, it's pretty much straight off the page of what I would think you'd do with Alfred. I really like this actor. And Alfred seems to be, among every Batman movie, seems to be one of the more consistent characters that we write. It seems like we haven't really had a terrible Alfred yet.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, we've been reinventing him a lot lately. We like to give him a gun and make him a little younger, and
yeah, we like to do the
have him punch people in the face, and
yeah, we like to do the like he's a ex MI6 or whatever it is. It's interesting. Do you think anyone's definitive Alfred will ever be Jeremy Irons?
I think a lot of people want that to be their definitive Alfred. I mean, Eric talks about that all the time. Where like a lot of people say that's maybe the best Alfred, but we haven't gotten a whole lot with him. I don't know. I think he's fine. I don't really get the love for that, but
I like his voice. I don't really care for the like super like grizzled Alfred that is kind of a badass in his own right. I don't really care for that. I like the posh British butler.
You're a purist. You need everything to be exactly like your favorite thing.
It's
not like animated series; it just doesn't count at all. That's
exactly. If you don't do it as the exact same way that the animated series did it, it's blasphemy. That's just how Batman is for me.
Danny's one of those people. Just deal with it.
I am. If it's not that Batsuit, if it's not that Alfred, if it's not that Robin, I don't care about Jason Todd because he's not in Batman the Animated Series.
Wow, he goes that far.
No, that was more sarcasm, but I don't care for that character.
Which is funny because Tim Drake in that show is kind of a fusion.
He's more interesting.
I mean, I'm just saying, there's some Jason Todd in that character.
Oh, he is. It's funny. The only thing I could point to that isn't like definitive, or that my definitive version of a character, it doesn't come from Batman the Animated Series, is probably Tim Drake. Like the more comic book accurate Tim Drake is what I always think of as Tim Drake, because I really like Robin, who goes into it by his own mission. Like, he wants to be Robin. He wants to be a detective. He wants to carry that mantle on. I really love that idea for that character.
Have you read any Red Robin?
No, I haven't, and I've been meaning to.
Because it's so good.
I'll have to get some recommendations from you, but after I started reading Rebirth Detective Comics, I was like, I got to read more Tim Drake. I need more of this character.
Yeah. No, he's great. So, Danny, are you sick of this movie yet?
Absolutely not.
We are 4 commentaries in. Danny is still holding strong.
I am. I'm loving this movie every time I see it.
Oh, by the way, I think it was our first commentary. I couldn't remember what Vicky waiting sounds like. We have that joke where it's like it's about the scene where she's waiting. This is scandalous. I don't know what I was thinking of. I listened to the soundtrack again the other day, and we'll talk about this when we do the music commentary. But Vicky waiting is hilarious, and I just can't wait for you to listen to that. If you've never listened to it, it's great.
I haven't. I'm going to be listening to it.
It's exactly what it sounds like.
And some more tomorrow, before we do the next commentary.
Yep. Now he sings about Vicky waiting, and yep. And when I was a kid, I should have been like, "What does half of this soundtrack have to do with Batman?" Yeah, but I didn't. I was cool. But Vicky waiting has like stuff about Gotham City, and it's hilarious.
It's funny because I've always heard people talk about Prince doing the soundtrack for the movie. And every time I watch the movie, I was like, where's the Prince stuff at? I hear that one song, but it's not like you did one song and that's the whole soundtrack. And it wasn't until after I realized, oh no, there's an entire soundtrack that's not really included in the movie that he did.
Well, no, but I mean, like 4 or 5 of his songs show up in the movie.
That I'm thinking of 2. You've got Truth, and then
he's all over it. So you've got Trust. So you got Trust. You've got Party Man. You've got the song that's playing over the party at Wayne Manor.
I've never realized that was a Prince song.
Oh yeah. There's a song playing. I forget if it's Electric Chair or which one it is, but at the beginning of the movie, with the family that's not the Waynes, there's a. They walk past a song. It's not actually scoring that scene, but it's in there. No, there's like at least 4.
Oh, okay. I'll have to go when I go and finally listen to the soundtrack, and I'll pick up on those and be like, oh wait, I do know this from there. So it'll be.
And then when you get to Bat Dance, that's just a remix of like several of the songs on that soundtrack. with the bat dance melody in the chorus. So like we just keep using all those songs. Yeah, it sounds like he's just being a DJ.
Interesting. I can't wait to listen to that now.
But yeah, it was a while when I was a kid before I realized that that Bat Dance was just kind of like a reprise of the rest of that, of most of that that soundtrack.
Cool. Is that at the end of the soundtrack or something?
Yeah, I think it's right at the end. But anyway,
well, that makes sense.
Yep. And then it ends. And then it ends with Batman going stop.
Is it Michael Keaton going stop?
Yeah, because we just mix in lines from it's if you've never listened to Bat Dance.
Not in a while, so I'm not necessarily remembering a whole lot.
Man, also make sure you watch the music video because we'll have to talk about that. That's the whole thing.
Oh yeah, that's the one where Prince is in the half Batman, half Joker thing, right? Yeah, I have seen.
Now that we've already exhausted everything I wanted to say about the music.
Well, we'll just revisit it all, like we're revisiting this movie.
We will. But we'll just stretch it to 2 hours. Well, folks, thanks a lot for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Tomorrow we will be back with you with another one, so look forward to it. And hope you're sticking with us and enjoying watching Batman 89 over and over and over again. Danny, we are only 3 now away from what I'm sure will be an epic and long talked about performance by the two of us.
I cannot wait for the quarter long.
We're going to do another quarter-long commentary where Danny and I are gonna divvy up all the voices. I just cannot wait. Or all the parts, I should say. I cannot wait.
It's going to be so much fun.
Thanks again, everybody. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Danny.
See you tomorrow.